The grooves and dimples are never even. The eyes are displaced, overcome with wrinkles, bulged out, or shoved in towards the brain, giving ground. The forehead may fold to greasy ridges, the jawbones grind and click, and occasionally the ears may pop like in a swift dive. Some say the eyes are laughing when a smile is done right. Really, they are crying out. The smile takes something from the eyes, from the rest of the face, from the life of a person. Did you hear about that guy in Alabama who messed himself up from smiling too much? It happened at a 24-hour diner of a popular restaurant chain that won't be named here, during a 3-day Friday and weekend shift in the summer of the Bay, beach season. As part of this guy's manager training, I'm not sure whether it was done to humble or actually train him, but this young manager in training, a sort of tarnished golden boy, according to the description of the newspaper, was given the toughest frontline tasks. He washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, and lugged around things like hash browns and eggs, all while greeting customers with booming yet pleasant energy and a broad smile. Well, he worked the 3 consecutive 13-hour shifts at the height of beach season on the bay. His hiring manager loomed in the background doing her own mysterious tasks, always somehow watching him. There wasn't much privacy as he washed dishes. In fact, the lines and stacks of dishes in the long, hot machine were expertly placed just behind the serving and checkout bar. Because he spent most of his time washing dishes, being the only one to wash dishes during his shift, he was in a perfect position to see every patron as they walked through the front door. To see and to be seen, and to greet with his huge smile and ever-friendly voice. Greet and wash. Greet and wash. Clean the bathrooms. Get those frozen hash browns from the back room and bring them to the cooks. You dropped that carton of eggs. See that yolk oozing out? Go ahead and throw them away and get another. You're not washing dishes quickly enough. Here, let me show you how. It's not my job, but you'll hold up the rest of us. From his own lips to the newspaper, he'd try to work faster. Then he'd notice some dishes with specks and blobs on them after they'd gone through, and he'd have to slow down again. Those dishes were very hot after going through the machine. It wasn't like any kind of dishwashing machine we're used to at home, but it was instead a kind of long assembly line of a box that steamed the hell out of them after he'd manually scrubbed them. He didn't know how others could tolerate it. It was like his hands were boiling in a pot as he dried and stacked the dishes. He performed his duties with a smile ironed out onto his face that he hoped wouldn't wrinkle when he finally sat down. He did it all while being watched. As for his constant smiling, he'd actually been at that for weeks before the manager training of the diner. He'd been trying to get ahead in the rough job market, in the depths of that economic recession. I think it was around 2010 when this happened, when he was supposed to have been trying a new grin therapy, or something to improve his moods, emanate goodwill, and get into the habit of keeping a smile. There were CDs and equipment, right in the middle of that grin therapy. He'd gone to a local job fair and met the people at the diner chain's booth, who were recruiting aggressively for dynamos and hungry, friendly pack leaders, at a time when other companies were being picky about who to hire to take out the trash. They barely glanced over his resume before deciding he had the right stuff. Some sweaty handshakes, some cobbled together references, and a personality test taken at a public library later, and he was set up at a motel for his 3-day shifts at a restaurant location on the bay, and thrown into the water, so to speak, during a feeding frenzy. Hordes must have came for the eggs, bacon, and waffles. People with sandy feet, when they weren't wearing sandals or shoes, with scents of fish guts and stale beer surging through the front doors with them. People with their loud children, and, at night, louder drunks and youths probably wandered in from beach rambles, bar hops, condo parties, or nightly fishing expeditions with smirks and laughter and gazes that caught on him as he washed dishes, caught and lingered for too long like the gazes of grinning perverts or scientists. There must have been grin-offs, but he could never falter. One man interviewed by the newspaper, who was a kind of vagrant and whose status as a buying patron questionable, had said that, yeah, he'd seen the kid washing dishes. I told him to his face how sorry I felt for him. The man was quoted in the newspaper as saying, "Kid was smart looking and well kept, but you could see that he just didn't want to be there behind the counter washing dishes." Had the smile come off as artificial to the vagrant? Or had it slipped, parting like velvety curtains to offer a glimpse of what was behind? The newspaper didn't answer those questions, so I asked them now. Those long shifts on a weekend in a busier location, washing dishes, cleaning bathrooms, and greeting in between while constantly being observed by his hiring manager. It was all really part of the interview process. This paid training that he hoped was nothing like what he had been doing as a manager, and at any moment a slip smile could be perilous. You know, some people worry that will be all it takes to get passed up for a job. Some worry that a slip smile, or the habit of a slipped smile, will get them cut from their company. If it decides to tighten its belt, the habit of a slipped smile is a little like a slipped disc in the back. It could seriously impact the worker, making them unfit. One can imagine the clatter of the plates and shouts of the short order cooks, the boisterous ringing and scraping and talking and laughing of the patrons, a child or two crying out, a drunk or two crying out a little later on, cigarette smoke scratching the throat, murky dishwater splashing up into the mouth from a flurry of quick washing. One can imagine all of that plus the non-stop smiling, helping to create the little twitch in the right eye that he told the journalist had begun for him around 7 p.m. of Saturday's long shift. But the catalyst had most certainly been the smile. A few patrons interviewed about it, and they didn't remember the smiling, which conflicted with the manager in training's report. They remembered a sadness to him, though they couldn't exactly recall the expression on his face. On Saturday night, around 9 p.m., as he told the newspaper, a warm, windy night, he saw someone he had known from high school. By then, his hair must have been matted with grease and sweat, his eyelids and lips sticky with syrup. All of that stuff would have been second or third hand. All of it but the sweat. The old acquaintance, who'd gone to the same private preparatory school in a nearby city, had come in with his thick but well-trimmed sandy blonde hair, gelled, not greased, fishing shorts with netted pockets, a Rodeo de Pech t-shirt, and a red snapper on the shirt pocket, and German-made leather sandals with large gold buckles. I think I've retained the details of that guy's attire so well because of my surprise at how vividly that manager in training recalled them to the newspaper. I thought they must be extra important to him. He told the newspaper, though, that the reason he knew it had to be the old schoolmate was the way the other guy kept hosing him down with his eyes as he scrubbed the dishes and loaded them in the machine. The old acquaintance just stood there, pretending to look above his head, but really staring a hole in his head, as if he wanted to get right on through and into his brain to figure out why he was here washing dishes behind the counter, when he had gone to that expensive private school with the rest of them. The manager in training wanted to shout at the old schoolmate, above the din of the restaurant, that he was the manager in training and not a dishwasher. His tortured pride burned in his ears. It whipped his nerves like a dish towel against someone's backside. He imagined this other kid was in law school or med school, and here he was washing dishes. The more that old acquaintance stood there, back a little from the mass of people near the counter but painfully close, the more that fellow was like a specter in a mist, although, with all the lights, it was about as bright and clear as a noontime beach in that diner. And just like a specter, he was gone one time when the manager in training looked up. Had he even ordered anything? After a second night of uneasy sleep, during which he once again used some equipment he had gotten in the mail to stretch his mouth, the manager in training woke up that Sunday feeling sore and confused. "I want to talk to you after lunch hour," his hiring manager said on Sunday, around 10:30 a.m. The manager-to-be was throwing up a column of plates so he could run over and clean the bathrooms. Lunch hour meant not lunch break, but lunch work for the employees at the diner. And it was long, actually a few hours. I want to talk to you about your personality test," his hiring manager said. He must have really begun to sweat after that, and I imagine him wiping a constant slime from his forehead. He told the newspapers he had worried that whole time during the long lunch hour as he worked and struggled behind his grin. He hadn't exactly lied on the personality test, but when taking it the previous week, he had most often chosen what he thought was the right answer. The answer they wanted over what he actually would have done or felt. For example, he had penciled in the bubble for often and eagerly introducing himself as well as others at social gatherings and networking events. He actually didn't attend such events, and when he did, he often waited until others noticed him, if they noticed him. He also had shaded in the answer for still having enough energy to entertain friends after a typical workday. Things like that. He had known the kind of person the company was looking for in a manager, and, after all, wasn't everyone saying to fake it until you make it? He could be like they wanted him to be, until he became that person, and if he couldn't, what were his other options? So when he finally sat down with his hiring manager, her name was Stella, to talk about the personality test, his nerves had jangled and joggled him to the point of exhaustion, and he didn't feel anything like the entity he had penciled in for that personality test. Stella was a short, fit woman, probably in her early 30s, with small features and a smile that had a lot of range. She'd struck him as the kind of person who already had mastery over it, who could produce a hippie smile or a sergeant smile, and just about every shade between, and who could slide through them as quickly and fluidly as a magician through a deck of cards. He told the newspaper he remembered they spent a great deal of time moving the oily plastic menus out of the way at their booth table. There were too many. You'd move one laminated sheet, and there would be another waiting behind it. She had a binder and a notebook, and he had nothing but his hands fidgeting under the table. The table smelled like pine bacon. She didn't ask whether he wanted to eat or drink anything. What followed was an inquisition in which each word pricked him like a pine needle from that pine bacon forest. She asked him the same questions from the personality test, but too quickly, barely giving him time to answer, trying to trip him up. Strongly agree, neutral, or strongly disagree. I take the initiative to plan and organize events for friends and family. I go out of my way to meet new people. I enjoy talking about myself. I rarely panic. If someone like an old granny falls down, I immediately run over to pull them up, even if they resist my help. I always report someone's error, even if it will get them fired, and they are my friend and have a family that depends on them. I take control. I am always in control. I may be paraphrasing a little, but that's the gist of it. He escaped by saying he felt sick, and he did, like someone who'd gone on those whirling teacups too many times. He said that it might be food that he needed, and she gave him not food, but something closer to a hippie smile on the spectrum. She said they'd go over his answers again later. After that, he started grinning with all of his teeth, as if that was something that could save him, though his teeth were yellowed and crooked, and one of them was missing. And though when another animal showed their teeth, it was a threat. He even ventured out from behind the counter a few times to try his toothy grin out on people at their tables. It was during one such expedition that a beefy man had turned from his wife, 2 kids, and egg slithers and brown-red pulp on his plate, had jerked so suddenly with a clouded frown, the frown of a man on a roof yelled at from below, that this young manager in training's response was to somehow stretch even more teeth into his smile. You might say that he grew extra teeth in that moment. The smile jammed the other features aside. The crookedness of it must have caused extra outward pressure on his already twitching right eye. Next thing you know, that sucker was ejected from its socket, completely ripping loose from what must have already been frayed optic nerve and eye muscle, and falling, I kid you not, onto that family man's plate of egg slithers and mystery mash. There was that moment of disbelief or shock. Then the family began to squirm. Someone at a nearby table shouted, "Awful prank. Don't tip him." They'd mistaken that young manager in training for a waiter. There were the harsh whispers and grinding, uncertain, chained-to-seat movements of people on a diving plane. These were the last things this tarnished, would-be golden boy of a diner chain remembered before he fell down and lost consciousness. Wait, there was one more thing. Just before he blacked out, he thought he saw his hiring manager standing with the people above. She might have just been a hallucination or a dream, but he told the paper that he told her, "I don't think I'll be a good fit." He'd said what he thought was on her mind. After surgery, he slept for a long time, longer than was usual without being in a coma. The eye was lost forever. The news report said he smiled the entire time when they came to the hospital to interview him. Not a single slip. At the mention of his eyes squeezing out of his socket, his grin had reportedly not faltered, but had actually broadened. Funny thing is, he'd been smiling when they first walked in, even before they woke him up for the interview.